All right, thank you so much. Welcome to another episode of the award-winning Sales Game Changers podcast. Rob Efrus, we're over 800 episodes of the Sales Game Changers podcast, and we got a special show today. I'm going to be bringing on Rob Efrus in a second. Hey, this is Sales Game Changers. We transcribe every show we've ever done. Go to salesgamechangerspodcast.com to read all the previous over 800 shows. If you're watching this on YouTube, thank you so much. Go up, give us a thumbs up. We'd greatly appreciate that. And if you're listening to this on Apple Podcasts, give us a 5-star review. Rob Efrus, you've been on the show before with one of your clients at GitLab at the time. And we talked about how to be more effective in working with government customers, particularly the CIO level. So we're talking to Rob Efrus today, and we're doing today's show, Rob, only 3 days after you presented at the Carousel Conference and Collaboration Center. It was the 16th Federal Budget Breakfast. It was at Carousel. It was sponsored by Carousel. Thank you to Carousel for all that they do for the community. There was about 1,500 people, 500 people in the room, about 1,000 people virtually. And I've attended at least a dozen of your federal budget breakfasts in the past. You go into very granular detail on what the federal government is spending money on, and what the budget looks like, and what each individual department is allocating, and contract movement and trends. This past Friday, again, we're doing today's show in the middle of December of 2025. Your presentation last week kind of had like a different tone to it, I felt. You talked more about, of course, you were very granular, and good for you for speaking nonstop for an hour, taking 2 5-second breaks to take a sip of water. For anybody who is not familiar with Rob, I'm going to ask him to do an introduction in a second, but this is the 6th time he goes through the budgeting trends in excruciating detail, not excruciating, in very important detail. And it's probably one of the most important sessions of the year to help people who sell things to the federal government. And obviously, it's been an interesting year, 2025, with the shutdown and DOGE and everything related to it. All right, I'm going to ask you, throughout your presentation last week, you kept saying more than ever, selling professionals, you need to take note of this. Selling professionals, this is what you should be doing. If you're a selling professional, and I just said, okay, let's do a show with Rob real quick, and let's go to your 5 recommendations for selling professionals. All right, introduce yourself. Again, you've been on the show before, but let people know who you are, what you do, and then let's go through your 5 recommendations.
Thanks, Fred, for having me on. Robert Efrus. I've been a lobbyist and business development consultant focused on federal business outcomes for over 40 years. The focus of my efforts has always been on adding value to the federal and public sector sales teams, including the executives as well as the public sector sales reps. And last week's presentation was chock full of information, as you point out, primarily because it was a watershed type moment relative to where the President Trump's second administration has laid out its plans for the next 4 years, in essence, or starting that process. And I wanted to have a specific emphasis on helping the sales professionals in that room, as well as online, understand how the policies and priorities that the Trump 47th administration is impacting the sales climate. And that's why it had a little different tone, because there was so much to discuss. And so that's a little bit about me and what I was trying to do in the presentation. I spoke to Craig Abod afterwards, and his comment to me was, Rob, you made everybody in that room, as well as online, a lot smarter. And that was my intended objective. And so there you have it.
Yeah, and let's make them even more smarter on today's podcast. Again, Sales Game Changers podcast. So let's kind of highlight your five recommendations for selling professionals. Let's just go through the list. Let's start with number 1.
Number 1 is figure out how your solution that you and your company are selling align with the latest priorities coming out of the Trump administration, and they involve market segments, including artificial intelligence, cybersecurity, as well as broader policy objectives reflected in the president's management agenda, which was just recently released, as well as what's left of the Department of Government Efficiency, or DOGE, where even though the leaders of that DOGE effort, namely Elon Musk and his lieutenants, have all moved on, the principles underlying DOGE are still very relevant. And my goal was to highlight to the folks in the room and online that a part of your selling motion needed to identify how your specific offering aligns with the priorities in those various areas. And
Yeah.
absent that, when you're talking to end user customers, when you're talking to contracting officials, when you're talking to partners, having that alignment baked into your messaging is going to increase, I believe, the traction you will get in terms of chasing business at the agency level.
No, that's a great point. And, we talk a lot on the Sales Game Changers podcast about vertical strategy, understanding where your customers are going. And I don't want to sound ignorant here, but it seems like more than ever that the management direction is really going through all the agencies.
It is, and that's a great point because you talk about AI. The
Mhm.
administration released in June an AI action plan, and that spelled out, priorities in terms of how agencies should use, procure artificial intelligence. It included a specific shout out to a subject near and dear to me, and that is use more open source software. But the point I want to make is that now agencies are implementing their own action plans that are aligned with the White House action plan for AI. And sales reps that have an AI element in their solution or are pure AI, they need to figure out how their value propositions align with that White House policy as well as what the agencies are trying to do, because for all, it's a work in progress. And if the sales rep hasn't figured out that messaging, they're missing a tailwind that they can leverage. And that goes as well to cyber and DOGE and the president's management agenda, which had a discrete focus on IT modernization.
Absolutely. Before we go to bullet point number two, for people who don't know, can you give us the status of Doge? Like you mentioned, Musk and a lot of his lieutenants have moved on, but I talked to a lot of government people in the tech space, and they're still engaging at some level. Where are we? Again, we're doing today's interview in the middle of December of 2025.
Yeah, so a headline broke about 2 or 3 weeks ago that Doge is dead. And the administration stood up a response to that, saying, no, it's not dead. They identified a good number of projects underway, one of which I spoke about at the budget breakfast in terms of the Department of Interior digitizing all of the permit application processes, kind of core to their mission. And so that gave you an indication that from a policy standpoint, even though the organization is not active out of GSA, its principles in terms of efficiencies and consolidation and managing software costs are all very much priorities of the administration, even in the absence of Elon Musk.
Very good. All right. Before we go to bullet point number two, I do want to say that I got an email from Carasoft right afterwards where they have all the links to the various things that you went through and some of Greg's remarks, Craig Abad's remarks as well. So we'll put those links on the show notes on Sales Game Changers podcast number two. All right, Robert Efrus, number two. What was your second observation?
Familiarize yourself, this is to the sales reps, with the billions of dollars of funding that are available in the One Big Beautiful Budget Bill
Mm.
that was passed last year, contained a very, very significant amount of funds in general for many different activities, but specific to federal sales. There are billions of dollars that were approved for AI and cyber in specific market segments like maritime and defense autonomy, border security, weapons testing and cyber, rural broadband, rural health, and nuclear and science. Cloud matters. And we are dealing with taking a step back with a very tight budgetary environment as the bulk of federal agencies are still operating under a continuing resolution. And the administration is taking more discretion away from the Congress in terms of how it reallocates funds that have already been appropriated. All of that suggests that agencies are under the budgetary gun, and federal sales reps need to be familiar with these pots of one big beautiful bill funding that are still available that agencies can access in the priorities areas I mentioned, IT and cyber being two broad categories. And so that when you get budgetary related objections to your deal, and your customer is out of tricks in terms of how to find money, having a knowledge of where these one big beautiful bill funds reside and how agencies can access them will be a feather in your cap.
That is a great thing. A lot of times for people who are listening who aren't familiar with selling to federal and public sector, for that matter, a big part of the selling process is understanding where the budget is, what's available to be spent, et cetera. Before we get to number three, I just want to ask you to define for the audience continuing resolution. For people who don't understand, don't spend like an hour, but just kind of give us like a synopsis, because we throw that term around a lot. And even last week, I've had some people explain to me parts of it that I didn't understand. So just kind of give us like a 1 minute overview for people who are ignorant on what that means.
Sure. Congress is required by law every year to enact and fund the federal budget. And many years, over the last 20 plus years, Congress hasn't been able to complete that job by the end of the government's fiscal year on September 30th. And so as a result, they have to pass a temporary funding measure that freezes the spending levels of federal agencies funded under that CR at the enacted levels, which is typically a year prior, and run those spending levels out on a month by month basis, depending on how long the continuing resolution lasts. During a CR, agencies can't embark on new starts, and they have to live within their budgetary means as described.
All right, very good. All right, number three.
Number three, I spent more time than ever on acquisition reform. There's
Mm,
a once in a generation
it's
effort
true.
to rewrite the procurement rules governing how the government purchases IT products and cyber products and services. And I challenged the sales reps in the room and online to be at least have a cursory understanding of what is trying to be accomplished. And in a nutshell, these reforms, which are occurring at a national level through a rewrite of the federal acquisition regulations, as well as an agency specific level, and notably the Department of Defense rewriting its own rules. They're intended to try and make the government buy things more on a commercial basis versus a custom basis, which typically costs more over time. The rules are trying to be biased in favor of new, innovative entrants into the federal market that don't have the years and years of experience in meeting all the various rules. And there are some specific exceptions that lower the barriers for new, innovative companies to enter the federal market to exclude them, if you will, in a favorable sense, from having to deal with all the minutia of federal contracting. The goal is on agile procurement, and with regard to the Department of Defense, ensuring that the acquisition process doesn't stand in the way of speed to mission type requirements.
Yeah, for people who don't know, who manages the federal acquisition regulations? Where does that get centered, and who's responsible with modifying those,
Sure,
modernizing?
there's a couple of key players. The first is the Federal Acquisition Regulation Council,
Mm.
and that has traditionally involved the Department of Defense, my old agency, NASA, and the General Services Administration. And they've been supported by an entity within the executive office of the president called the Office of Federal Procurement Policy. I would also add the Office of Management and Budget as the parent of the Office of Federal Procurement Policy is also another key stakeholder.
I know you don't have a crystal ball, and this is a little bit off track, but where do you think that's going? Where do you think is there going to be an endpoint where the government will be able to just, purchase the same way a typical corporation would, or where do you think we're going with the
I
reform?
wouldn't go that far, but what we're looking at is a much more streamlined rules and regulations. One example I gave during the presentation last week was the FAR, which is hundreds and hundreds of pages long, had formerly contained 1,500 references to the word shall, and the
Mm,
shall meaning that contracting officers must follow these specific rules. And they've eliminated 1,200 out of those 1,500 shalls
wow.
to give the contracting officers more discretion.
Yeah, that's powerful, man. Whew. All right, number four.
Number four is in relation, also acquisition reform related to an initiative called OneGov.
Mm.
And many in the enterprise IT space are familiar with a GSA initiative managed by its Federal Acquisition Service to scrutinize how much the government is spending on large software deals and provide a more larger discounts that involve direct contact with those large enterprise IT vendors, a list of which I presented during my presentation, and I noted
Yeah,
how much Carasoft has been involved as it represents many
yeah,
of those large enterprise vendors, but achieving discounts on the order of 70 to 90%. To date, it's been an invite only process where the GSA has identified the companies it wants to achieve those type of discounted outcomes. But there's a second form of the OneGov type arrangement called OneGov type that doesn't require these massive discounts, but rather can include um, 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 terms and conditions that are different from the status quo, that don't rise to that massive discount level, but work toward that direction. And this is where I challenge the folks in the room and online to become familiar with how offering better terms to the government and leaning in on that, even as a smaller and medium-sized enterprise IT vendor, is going to be achieve a strategic benefit to the vendor to the extent, on the one hand, they recognize that this is what this administration is trying to do. It's the vendor is doing what it can, as contrasted with these larger companies, and that's a strategic investment. I encourage the vendors represented in this breakfast that I spoke at to try and figure out what they can do, because strategically it's going to put you in an advantage position with your customers down the road.
yeah. It's interesting as you're going through these your four bits of advice, and we're going to get to the fifth one here in a second. Uh, I'm saying to myself, I mean, the reason we do this is it's such a huge marketplace, right? As you're talking, I was thinking like, wow, does this even make sense for people to want to sell because of all these things that makes it a challenge to sell to the federal government, but it's still Fortune 1 and it's still doing things that are, I tell people this all the time. Everything that happens for the most part in the government is critically important to the citizens of the United States and the world. Again, we're talking like people who are devoting their careers to fixing highways, right? And people who obviously the safety of the citizen in war areas, et cetera. And of course, research in health and human services. As you know, I'm a world renowned expert on Lyme disease awareness. And today, on December 15th, RFK Jr. is going to be holding the first roundtable on Lyme disease to address more research and treatment. The things that happen in the government impact everybody every single day.
Yeah, for the sales rep who is dealing with a large federal agency which has a siloed implementation of that rep's company's software. One step to take that a sales rep otherwise wouldn't is to have a good sense as to where your software is running in that federal agency and proactively identify how the consolidation of those different stovepipe implementations can be done in a way that lowers the cost to the government, but still
Mm.
maintains the position of the vendor in that agency's install base. It's a step that sales reps you would think would not want to do because the more silos you could argue, the more commission the sales rep will get. That's true, but in this environment, leaning in a way that can demonstrate good faith on the part of the vendor in terms of trying to streamline in that illustration all the various licenses around an agency will put you in good stead with that agency customer.
No, that's great. I had a couple of CIOs from the government on the podcast about a year or two ago, and I asked them for their advice. And they said, just help us work with your company. Help us understand, the various ways, the vehicles that we have, and how we can optimize our business relationship with your company. So that's sound advice. All right, Rob Efrus, again, the 16th Federal Budget Breakfast. I'm asking you for your 5 bits of advice for selling professionals, and these are actually more than bits. Give us number 5.
Number 5 is in an area that not all federal sales reps are involved with, but it's one where the efforts of President Trump and his team to get the NATO countries and other foreign countries to agree to buy more from U.S. suppliers is a trend that is underway. In the first Trump administration, President Trump sought that those NATO countries and others allocate 2% of its defense budgets to buying from American suppliers. Now that percentage has increased to 5%.
Mm.
And both the administration and the executive branch, as well as the Congress, are taking steps to make U.S. companies more competitive in these global marketplaces where the U.S. is competing against adversaries like China. And
Mm.
so for those reps that have some involvement with foreign military sales, I am suggesting that you become familiar with these reforms and redouble your efforts to position your offerings to NATO countries and others because you've got tailwinds coming out of the White House and coming out of the Congress that I think is going to enable your company to get a larger piece of the pie.
That's a great bit of advice. I want to follow up on one topic that you didn't bring up, but I think I see as a huge trend is, and it kind of goes into some of the things that we talked about here. A lot of government professionals have left. Either they've been laid off or because of downsizing. A lot of them have reached retirement age and have chosen, the packages that were made available to them over the last 12 months. So one of the things that we're seeing a lot of is there's new people being in responsibility. Uh, it used to be, I remember we've spoken with a number of people, sales leaders on the podcast and at the Institute for Effective Professional Selling, who have been at a company for 30 years, the Oracles, IBMs, Intels, et cetera, and their government customer has gone with them for the 30 years. Well, now a lot of those relationships are going away because a lot of the government people have left. What will be your advice for selling professionals to re-engage or to newly engage with the new people who are in these roles, who might be new to government perhaps, or to new to an agency, or have been promoted, whatever it might be?
Yeah, and this was the basis of my first
Hmm.
point, and that is you've got an administration with approximately 4,000 political leaders, Schedule C appointees,
Mm-hmm.
that are new to their roles and new to government. And then you've got this a major workforce gap where over 300,000 federal employees left government service. And the goal, first and foremost, is to show how engaging with your company will address the administration's priorities. Because agency leaders, political appointees, as well as folks who are new to government, all are seeking to make their agencies and their agency leaders look good with the Trump administration, which has aggregated more power in the executive branch in over a generation,
Yeah.
unprecedented. So you want to have that policy perspective. You also need to consider how your solution can address those workforce gaps. This administration has placed a great priority on AI and the related automation outcomes that are achieved through AI. So if you're selling an AI solution that enables the government to do more with less manpower, that would be a perfect example of how to address some of these gaps.
Rob Efrus, thank you so much again. Thanks for doing this for 16 years and for all the value you've provided to the selling community. Like I told you, like Craig said, we're all smarter every year by attending your session, but this year there definitely was a unique tone to it. Any final thoughts? Anything you want to wrap up on that we might not have discussed that you definitely want to get across to the audience today?
I am a salesman at heart. I have sales DNA, and so that is why my focus has been on making the sales stakeholders smarter and enabling them to do their jobs better on behalf of the government. The government needs industry more than ever. There's more of a focus on ensuring that industrial base is vibrant, so that we can achieve both for our country as well as in the global marketplace. The U.S. can continue to be a leader.
That's great. And once again, the Institute for Effective Professional Selling, every month we're going to be addressing these topics with sales leaders as part of our what we call our main stage live programs, which are held hybrid. And the live portion is at the Carasoft Conference and Collaboration Center in Reston, Virginia, and virtually around the globe. All right. Once again, thank you, Rob Efrus, for the great job for being on today's show. My name is Fred Diamond. This is the Sales Game Changers
Thank you,
podcast.
Fred.
Thank you.